Welcome to PAB 2010.
Orson Welles descended in Hollywood. And that was in danger of actually drowning out all that other stuff. Welles, at the time, you have to understand, had conquered Broadway with his incredibly avant-garde productions of Shakespeare. He had conquered radio largely through his Mercury Theatre, who the year before had produced the famous War of the Worlds broadcast. It's estimated that 6 million people might have actually believed that those broadcasts were real, many of them in Canada, as a matter of fact. And broadcast regulations were actually changed as a result of his simulating reality in that show. So Orson Welles got off the plane, and he toured RKO Studios, and he came out and told the press, this is the biggest electric train set a kid ever had. A films were the ones that got all the attention, all the budget, all the big stars, all the publicity push. And they were the ones that were created to resonate. B films were the filler. They were the Krispy Kreme donuts of Hollywood. They were formulaic, A to B, you know what you're going to get, you look forward to it, you savor it, and almost immediately it's forgotten. Resonance is the difference between an A film and a B film. I'm going to pull that around to podcasting very shortly. So why does Citizen Kane resonate? Film critics are going to tell you 1,000 reasons, and I'm not even going to get into them, but the one I want to get back to is Welles' attitude coming out of that studio tour, saying that the studio was the biggest electric train set a kid ever had. So to understand more about resonant content, you have to understand that resonant media begins with both sides of the brain. And let's start with the really unfun left side of the brain, the rational, logical side. Before you can create resonant media, what you need is a good, solid architecture. You need a solid idea. And one of the great things about working on the commercial side or working in publishing, and one of the most annoying things is they always press you to come up with one line that synopsizes your mission, what you do. It is a big pain in the ass, and it's the hardest thing you're ever going to have to do. But once you do it, you have a really solid idea of what you are and where you're going. What's more, you can always use that as a zero-up point. That's your calibration point. You come back to that when you're wondering, okay, what am I doing and why am I doing this? You always come back to that and say, oh yeah, my mission is this. And it's actually incredibly handy as you go. The other side of it is you need to approach your media, your podcast, your brand with a sense of proprietorship and ownership, a sense of responsibility, no matter how avant-garde or pirate or countercultural you want to be. Be responsible for it. Be the proprietor. I'm reminded of a quote from one of the greats in the advertising business, Howard Luck Gossage, who once said, trying to teach responsibility to ad people, and this applies to what we're talking about too, is like trying to explain to a bunch of 8-year-olds why sexual intercourse is actually a lot more fun than chocolate ice cream. You get this architecture in place, you look upon your brand, you know exactly what your mission is, then you get creative. That is the what of what you do when you create media. The what is your mission. You know essentially what you want to say, and you know what your content's going to be. The part that really needs attention, and I think a majority of your time, is the how you say it. And I think in most media, podcasting, mainstream and otherwise, it's the most overlooked thing there is. I was explaining to the folks at lunch that when we do the Age of Persuasion, Terry will put several hours into notes. I will put several hours into notes. Between us, maybe 5 or 10 hours of notes for a show and discussions going into what we're going to do. That's nothing. It's 3 days to write the script after that. We have the what, but it takes 3 days to come up with the how, and then an 18-hour day in production. We slave over the how of the message, and if we've had any luck resonating, I really believe that's the reason for it. So the left brain handles the what, the right brain handles the how. One of the big mistakes, now podcasting is by no stretch of the imagination a new medium, but it's often being regarded as a new medium, and it's certainly being perceived that way. One of the common mistakes when people go into a new medium is they bring to it the sensibilities and techniques of the media that came before. For example, the first TV ads were radio ads with pictures. And the first radio ads were really nothing but glorified print ads read aloud. So resonance can be simple. That's my idea. If you get creative, you find a really interesting way to say what you want to say, it doesn't have to be complicated. I want to get a note in here on who you're serving when you podcast, and that's something broadcasters have to deal with too. Are you doing it for yourself, or are you doing it for your audience? And it sounds like an obvious question, but it really isn't, because a lot of people in my trade actually do stuff for themselves. If you're creating media only for the sake of your own gratification, there is a word for this, it is masturbation. Unless you're Rupert Murdoch, in which case it's Fox News. It is okay to create media for yourself, to please yourself, but it is vital that you serve your audience, and you cannot ever forget that. That's how you build community. To that end, too, you also really understand your community. You know who they are. You have a sense of who they are. It doesn't mean you have to speak, this came up at lunch, doesn't mean you have to necessarily speak to a broad spectrum of people. You can be very specific, because other people can hear you conversing to that very specific person and still be part of the conversation or still be around the group. In fact, I think it's good not to be all things to everyone. We have made a point in the Age of Persuasion over the years to try to plant in little effects, asides, factoids, that sort of thing that we figure either no one's going to get or maybe one person in 1,000. But we know that one person in 1,000 we have for life because they feel part of a very special club. We're not afraid to do the thing that everybody won't get. We just don't design the whole show around that philosophy. Has anybody been podcasting with the same podcast for more than, I'll use this incrementally, a year? 2 years, more like that. 3 years, same podcast. 4 years, 5 years. Okay, I'll just keep going until your hands are down. 6 years, 5 years. Time is an incredible advantage in creating resonant media. We have a show on CBC that's been running for 4 years with another series that ran before that, and there's still a sense that we're building audience. You've got that familiarity, you've got time. It is so underused now to stick with something and build your community that way. We get restless and we move on. I'm in the ad trade where a campaign in the olden days, somebody create Tony Tiger and he's still on the air 40 years later. Now in the ad world where I live, a campaign might last 6 months. That's a long campaign. And then it's torn down and started completely again, and all the equity that came with it is gone. You want to resonate, you need familiarity. It's about relationship building, isn't it, with communities? And relationship building takes time. Be restless about the creative side, and when I say that, one of my personal preferences is get the hell out of the hermetically sealed booth. Depending on what you're doing, it may be the right time and place, but why be in a vacuum? Record some sounds at the park. Record at the park if you can, but if you can't, record some sounds at the park. Loop them and make them a background and say, I'm coming from the park today. Be sick in bed one day. Be cooking while you do your work. Find an appropriate time and place for what you do. I thought I'd pop back to the 19th century today and talk to you from there. Or I'm cleaning out a stable. You could do anything that way. Tie it to your brand, tie it to your message, tie it to the essence of what you're doing. If you were doing a sex show, I would say put on a little reverb and saying you're coming to your audience from a particular part of someone's anatomy. The amount of reverb might have to do with the characterization of that anatomy. Do a show as a flashback. Do a show as a news report. Do your show while sick in bed or while cooking, while cutting the lawn. There's so many different directions you can go. Resonance is what separates the classics from the B pictures in film. In podcasting, it's resonance that raises art up from chaos and poetry from the clutter. And in 30 years, I've learned that one key ingredient that makes media resonate is attitude. Those who resonate are always taking risks. They're fearless about failure. They're always venturing beyond their comfort level. They're redefining media, and they're always serving their audience. But above all, they're treating their media as the greatest electric train set a kid ever owned.